Hello, and welcome to the EOA's network meeting today. My name is Yogi Johnston. I'm the Product Development Manager here at the EOA. And what that means is I manage our EO Learn training portfolio and work with experts to develop EO-specific training courses for the sector. Today's discussion is a panel discussion, and we're exploring leadership succession in employee-owned businesses. Becoming employee-owned is a change in ownership, and more often than not, it's a change in leadership as well. And that's why we're shining a light on this topic today. The EOA conducted some research on behalf of, so we had some research conducted on behalf of the EOA last year by one of our panel members, and we looked at the characteristics of successful leadership succession. We asked, what have people learned? What works, what doesn't work, what pitfalls to avoid? We had 25 businesses interviewed, which was fantastic. The conclusions that we captured were actually put into a report called The Road to Succession. Don't worry if you've not read it, it's on our website, and you will get a link to it after the session today as well. Reports are great, and they're really good for insight, but I'm a pragmatist. I'm always looking for the practical learning that can be made in any application. So I'm really excited that we've actually developed, in conjunction with Telos and JGAD Associates, a one-day leadership succession masterclass. This workshop builds on the learnings from the report. This workshop will actually be in person, which is fantastic. It's in April, and it's designed for those who have or will be succeeding into a leadership position. The session is about exploring what sustainable success looks like and with leadership, and how do you weave employee ownership through the business to deliver a great employee-owned business. And what's even better is actually the masterclass is going to be held at one of our EOA trustee members, Howden Group, in their premises in London. So if you'd like to find out more about this session, please do come and have a chat to either myself or Jeremy Gadd in the networking later today. And to book a place, you can visit our website. So you'll see that we've got other EOLEN courses coming up too. In February, we've got our independent trustee training course. Now, for me, this is a very exciting addition to our portfolio, because it's about helping independent trustees really continue developing their best practice approach to this role. It's about helping them create visible accountability and really establish value-add trusteeship for this role. And I'm always saying great leadership does not stop at the senior level. To deliver great ownership at every level of your organization, people have to be empowered to act like a leader. Our Empowering Leadership course does just that. The next course starts in March, and we have a few places left. So if you are looking to book any of these courses or have a look at all of our other courses, please do head over to the website where you can see all the details. We have another way of engaging with our EO community as well, and that is through our events. So the next ones that we've got coming up are How to Become Employee-Owned, which is in February as well. If you know a business that's considering employee ownership, or you're at the very early stages of considering EO, this is a great webinar to attend. You'll hear from a business that's made the transition, and you will hear from our sponsor, RM2. The other thing to note in your diaries is our annual Robert Oakeshott lecture. This is an annual event, and this year we'll be hearing from Matthew Taylor, who's a Chief Executive of the NHS Confederation. It will be sponsored by Brabner's, and it takes place at the Bayes Business School in London. We also have our trustee dinner, so for our trustee members attached to that as well. Again, our website is the best place to go and have a look. Okay, so let's crack on with today's session then. We have 3 panel members who are going to share their insight and experiences around leadership succession. They're going to answer your questions, and after that, we'll all be heading into the networking area to have some further conversations with these individuals on smaller tables on a more kind of personal basis, and the opportunity to network and find out more about things like EO Learn and our membership value as well. So Our panel members today are Alex Bloom, who's a consultant at Telos Partners. Telos with JGAD Associates have conducted the leadership succession research I mentioned earlier, and they've also designed the masterclass. We also have Leanne Tritton, who's former owner of Ing Media, which is a PR and communications agency for the built sector. And we have Abby Knight, who's succeeding managing director of NC Squared, a software company that developed Distribution Engine, a native Salesforce application. Okay, I'd like to welcome them on stage now. Okay. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So I'm going to hand over to Alex, Leanne, and Abby to introduce themselves and share with us their insights and experiences. Whilst they're doing that, please do add your questions in the Q&A box for them. If there's a question that's already been asked, press the upvote button. The more upvotes a question has, the more it tells me it's a popular question and I need to ask it. And hopefully you're all familiar with reactions. I think I saw some coming up earlier. So if you'd like something that someone said, please do give it a reaction. So for example, do you think I should stop speaking and hand over to our guest now? Give me a thumbs up. Right, so I'm going to hand over to Alex to introduce himself.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I am facing some challenging network issues. So if you lose me at any point, I'm sure Yogi will intervene on my behalf. But welcome you all to this morning's webinar. As has already been mentioned, I'm from Telos Partners, where we believe that success for any organisation can only be sustained when the interests of all of the stakeholders are aligned. Our client work is focused on governance, leadership, strategy, culture, performance, engagement, change, and succession. To realise the full potential of EO, we see three areas as being key. The first is establishing leadership behaviours. The second is nurturing an ownership mindset and culture. And the third is embedding change through the governance of strategic planning and execution. To help us deliver great value and impact for the sector, we recently announced that we're merging with Jeremy Gadd Associates, and my colleague Jeremy Gadd is in the room, building on the relationship that we've established over the past 4 or so years, including the report that Yogi has referred to. Just to summarise some of the key points from that report, having spoken to 25 separately, we highlighted 3 key themes and some top tips. I'm not going to go through the whole report, but I will share those 3 key themes and the top tips. So theme 1, and we will come back onto this, no doubt, is successful succession comes at the end of a long road. Yogi's already shared some of the statistics in terms of the length of time that people took from the start of the process to the end, but it does take time, on average, 6.5 years. The second theme, the hardest. It definitely comes with a unique set of challenges, and subsequent successions, leadership successions, will face a series of challenges that could be different. Thirdly, there is a need to balance good EO with good business, and this is backed up by the work that's been done with the knowledge program, and again, I can talk to that later. So in terms of the top tips that came out of the conversations, begin early and set a sensible and appropriate timeline. We'll hear from Leanne and Abby soon, who will share their experiences. And again, we can discuss this more in the Q&A. You need to prepare and ready the leadership team at whatever stage they are. That was deemed as being key by the people we spoke to. Clearly define roles, especially the value that a founder can still bring if they're motivated to do so once they cease leading the business. Start as you mean to go on. Don't be afraid to ask for help and support. The fact that you're here today is a great first step, but the leaders we spoke to said there would have been numerous advantages for them if they had sought advice and input earlier. And finally, start thinking about the next succession now. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Alex. Some really key tips and things to think about. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Leanne.
Thanks, Yogi. So I set up an agency called Ing Media in 1999, and essentially I started sort of as a one-man band, but I always had aspirations to build the business to a level of scale where I could have some sort of exit. And I think, like a lot of people who, certainly in the communications world, who set up businesses, we were never really formally trained in management. So I learned as I went along and sort of made the vast array of mistakes that a lot of business owners go through. But I guess when I was sort of building the business, in my mind, there were only two options for an exit of a business, and that was either a management buyout or a trade sale. And because of the work that Ing did, so Ing works in what we call the built environment. So we're a specialist that deals with anything to do with the built world. So that comes from architecture, engineering, property development, right through to investors, sort of cultural organizations. So everything you think of with the built world. So it gave me personally a great sort of breadth of clients to learn from. Really, I was learning on the job. And one of the things that was really interesting for me is, first of all, my past boss had sold his business through a trade sale, and I'd come to some conclusions about whether that was a happy place for him during that process. And I'm not going to go into that, but it helped me form my own conclusions. But the other thing, I was watching a lot of professional services built businesses like architecture practices, engineering practices, were all, really struggling with this idea of succession, because many of them were founder-led businesses, quite charismatic leaders. They had hired people underneath them who were exceptionally good at supporting that founder, but they weren't necessarily hired as people to take the business to the next level. And the other thing is, I think a lot of founders, and it was an interesting position to be in, because I was a founder, but I was often sitting in meetings observing founders in operation, and I would come away thinking, am I like that? Is that how I'm behaving? But one of the big struggles I think that founders have is deciding when it's the right time to go. So I observed some people who managed their succession very well and were very clear, but I also got to see people who were struggling with succession in their own minds, and so you could see how that would sort of implicate the rest of the organization and the team. So I was quite often called by people who were the next tier down, saying, could you take so and so out to lunch and tell him it's time to go, or to clarify what the plan is. So I was learning, my own succession plan. So that helped formulate my ideas. And then I think it was about 8 years ago that Ing really I started to look at sort of formalizing our approach to business and our I wouldn't have called it a succession plan back then, but when I look back on it, that's what we were doing. So we were putting all the senior team through leadership training. We were putting the next tier through a program called Step Up, which was all about how to step up into management. Because again, and some of the people on the call may be familiar with this, you have people in your teams who are really, really good at being consultants or doing their their day job, but not necessarily as good working in the business. So we spent a lot of time and effort trying to bring that into fruition and really devolve power and responsibility to a wider team, so that we didn't have this constant issue of the founder being the person who holds all the relationships. So I think that happened about 8 years ago. And I think the penny really dropped for me with employee ownership when we'd been talking to a lot of clients who in the architecture sector who'd become employee owned. And I really didn't understand the mechanics of it. And that's when a client of mine put me in touch with Robert Postlethwaite from Postlethwaite's, who met with me and ran me through the mechanics. And for the first time, I realized that the employee ownership route for us was a win-win, because it allowed me to exit in a very calm manner, very planned, whereas traditionally, I think trade sales are a bit more brutal than that in my experience. Not always, but in my experience, someone gets hurt in those trade sales. And so that's where we started to go through that process. I think that the big step for us, though, was identifying who was going to take over my role. And that was more of a challenge, because we are working in a sector which is very specific to the built environment. So I needed someone who had credibility in that area. I needed someone who matched the value system of Ing, and also had worked in sort of some area of change management, because it didn't matter how calmly we managed the process, you still needed someone that the rest of the team could buy into. And also the other important aspect for Ing was that I identified that we had a massive opportunity going forward. I've said this before, but I felt I was I had the energy and the personality type to get the plane off the ground. And I guess I was looking for someone who could fly it long haul. And so we found that person. We were very, very fortunate. And, that is just, as everyone on this call knows, getting the right people to work in your business is everything. And we had a fantastic fluke, really, that it worked. And a guy called Damien Wild came in and became managing director 2 years ago. And then I slowly exited out of the business. So at the end of last year, I'd sort of left the business formally, but I remain as the founder. I still talk to clients when I'm asked to. I spend a couple of days a week. I pop in to the office and I have coffees and mentor younger members of staff. So I'm very connected to it, but I'm also incredibly aware that I stay well away from the management side. I had to go through, as the founder, I think I had to decide that I had to step away, and only you can do that. You can't get someone else to encourage you to do that. It's something that's very personal. It was, I mean, I don't want to get too hocus pocus, but I think my succession with Ing was happening at the same time as my son. He's 22 now, and I was letting go of his reins as well. So I've had to sit in darkened rooms sometimes and sort of bite my knuckles and say, I've just got to let them go. So anyway, that's my story.
Thank you, Leanne. That was really interesting. Some fantastic insight there. And just to pick up on, I think if I think about where you started, it felt 8 years ago is when you started to really help the kind of the team step up. And you use the words calm and planned, which to me really does kind of encompass what I think employee ownership does help people. But yes, pick up on the fact that you started that succession journey about 8 years ago, which ties into some of the things I think the report said to us as well. Right, so I'm going to hand over to Abby, who is a succeeding MD in an EO business.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Yogi. So yes, my name is Abby Knight and I'm the Managing Director of NC Squared. NC Squared is a small software company. We're a Salesforce ISV partner and produce an app, as has been mentioned, called Distribution Engine, which allocates leads or cases to teams of reps based on rules that the customer sets up. We've been around since 2011 and we're set up by two founders, both called Neil and both with surnames beginning with C, hence the name NC Squared. And we operated like a typical founder-led software startup for a long time. The founders were both developers and we had no hierarchical structure, not really any teams as such, and certainly not many processes, especially around things like HR and career development and training and things like that. I joined in 2016 and was the second employee to start. I initially joined as financial controller, but as most people find when they join startups, I ended up doing a lot more than that. In May 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, the founders sold the business to employee owners. So we're now about 4 years into being employee owned. We're 100% employee owned and due to pay off the consideration in about 2027. It's worth me saying that I was also the first employee trustee too. So the co-founders asked me to be that first trustee as I'd helped so much through the transaction and had some knowledge of how the structure would work. When we initially became employee owned, the founders wanted to step back from managing the company day to day too, but they did stay on as directors. They talked to a few of the senior members of the team and we formed a leadership team of 3 people. And then actually started to name the teams of people that we had in the company. We took on another member of the leadership team and grew to a 4-person leadership team. This worked really well for a good few years and the leadership team ran the company day to day with the founders being less and less involved. But it was becoming clear that without a leader of the leadership team, we were in danger of letting things slip through the net or potentially all looking at each other for decisions and not knowing who should be making those decisions. And it was also possible that with 4 people running the company, there could be differences of opinion with no one making the final decision. Equally, even the trust board meetings could become complicated because for a long time I was there as the employee trustee, but I could answer a lot of the questions about the performance of the business. But my tenure as an employee trustee came to an end in May 2023, and it actually wasn't clear who would attend the trust board to answer all the questions on behalf of a 4-person leadership team. Would we each attend one, or would we all attend all of them, which would result in 8 people being in a trustee board, which for a small business seems, actually quite excessive. At the same time, we were also facing the effects of the economic difficulties in both the US and the UK, and we suffered a reduction in our new business inquiries and an overall reduction in the licenses that we sell, which resulted in a reduction of revenue. And whilst we're still profitable, it is a concern for the business to be slowly shrinking. So it became clear that we really needed one figurehead at the top. We needed someone who would make final decisions, provide additional direction, be accountable, and hold others accountable for the necessary actions to drive the business forward. And the role would also then allow for a single point of contact for the trust board and a single point of accountability. It's interesting to note that the leadership team were feeling this was needed as well as the trust board, but the final decision on whether the role was actually needed and what to call it and the process and how to fill it came from the trust board. The trust board ideally wanted to fill the role from within the company and so invited anyone from within the company to apply. There were 2 candidates and we both had psychometric tests conducted by an external company and were interviewed by the trust board before a final decision was made by the board. It's worth saying that actually the decision to appoint an MD was met with quite a lot of hesitation from the employee owners. There were a lot of worries that this appointment would change the way that NC Squared feels as a company, and it was clear that this level of change made employee owners quite nervous. Actually, when we, being the leadership team, explained how it would make our lives easier and potentially our decisions better to have one person accountable, then actually the employee owners felt less nervous and the hesitation calmed down. I've now been in the post for 6 months or so. I'm the company's house director along with the 2 co-founders. And from my perspective, it's definitely been a huge learning curve. It's a subtle but important difference to have final accountability on your own rather than being part of a 4-person leadership team who all have joint accountability. And I think that's one thing I had not really quite appreciated, how different that would feel. The leadership team as an entity still exists and we still all work really well together, but it is definitely different for it just to be my head poking above the parapet, I suppose. I found that I've leaned on the founders more over the last 6 months than I had done previously. And I think that's because I know that they understand the weight of having the final responsibility for a team of 20 people on their shoulders. But the founders, the leadership team, the employee owners have ultimately been all very supportive of my appointment. And I really value their input and thoughts on how we can continue to make NC Squared a success.
Fantastic. Thank you, Abby. So 2 different stories in terms of that leadership succession. And right, so I'm going to jump into questions because we've got loads of questions coming in. One of the ones I actually want to ask both Leanne and Abby, excuse me, is around the internal and external succession search. So I think we've got 2 examples. Leanne, you went externally. Abby, yours was an internal succession. So I guess, Leanne, did you think about internal succession at all? And Abby, did you consider external succession as you were going through the process? So Leanne, if I can come to you first.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And yes, I think when you're running a business, I mean, you're constantly looking at people and making judgments about them on an ongoing basis, in terms of the qualities that are needed for going forward. And I'm at pain. I think this is probably the most difficult part, because the reality is the people, the co-directors I had in the business are exceptional at what they do, but I felt that they were like me in that they hadn't had experience in that sort of transition, and just the specific on that, the world of marketing and comms in the built environment is leaning more and more on digital transitions. So that's what I'm talking about. So that was really quite key to me in terms of realizing the opportunity of the business. So that's why I went externally. But we didn't use a search firm because it wasn't right to just have someone sort of come and plonked in the middle of the business, if you know what I mean. We didn't need necessarily an operations person because the business by then was operating very well. We were quite sophisticated, just listening to Abby in terms of structures and processes. All of that was pretty much in play. We had 45 people, so we were quite well run. But we were looking for people who could open up new business opportunities, lead the team into new areas, and so that change management was vital. So I did it by really going through my black book of people I knew and researching them, looking at talking to people who'd worked with them, those sorts of things. And then it was Damien that I came up with and met with, and we've had a very successful relationship since. But it's quite a sensitive area to, I think, work with the people that you work so closely with and are your friends really, and say, there's no one here that's quite right, I'm going outside. But I was fortunate. I think most people within our senior team were in agreement with that.
Okay, so I think what I heard there is you knew exactly what the business needed, and that kind of prompted, you did some of that research as well around that. Abby, could you share your experiences in terms of the internal? Did you consider external succession at all?
Yes, I mean, obviously, when the trust board were talking about needing this new role, there were definitely discussions about how to fill that role and whether it could be filled internally or externally. But the feeling was that there were candidates within the business internally that could be in a position to fill that role, and so the feeling was that actually we would go internally first if actually on balance that the internal candidates weren't right, then I think we would have looked externally. But our preference was to stay internal initially.
Okay, so again, I think it comes back to knowing what the business needs and who you've got within the business. Alex, could you share any of your thinking in terms of do you see leadership succession mostly going external or staying internal, and any considerations that people should have?
From the research that we conducted, of the 25 businesses, 12 had chosen successors from within their ranks. There's nothing to say that, you know, that statistic could be extrapolated beyond. I think you've already heard what the key considerations are. It's what does the business need? Leanne very succinctly identified that they needed someone who had change management experience. Maybe there's also new business development experience. The key is to understand what does the business need, and then start to look for the right type of individual. Leanne also mentioned the importance of a values fit. And I think it is safe to say that if a values fit is important to a business, and in my experience that is the case with many, if not all, employee-owned businesses, then an internal candidate, it is easily seen and understood if they have that fit. There will be false starts, and in interviews, experiences were shared of false starts with internal candidates as well. The other thing I would say on this is due diligence. As Abby mentioned, she was an internal candidate, but the process was still rigorous. Interviews, psychometrics, etc. And I think that is key for the individual who will succeed as CEO or as MD to know that they have not just been chosen because the founder or some beauty contest, but they are the right person for the job.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. So I think, yeah, what we're hearing is not necessarily about going externally, internally. It's about understanding what your business needs, looking at the values, and actually making sure you've got a rigorous process in place. So from our audience, we've got a question that's really popular. It's about incentivizing senior staff in employee-owned businesses. Abby, I'll come to you first. Is there anything you do within NC Squared around incentivizing senior staff? Is it important? Is it seen as needed?
Yeah, actually, we don't have anything separate. So we for incentivizing senior staff, any different to anybody who works for NC Squared, we have the option to have a bonus system, but actually we don't at the moment. All of our reward structure is based on salary and then based on the profit share. And we're quite lucky in that we can we are allowed, according to our terms of our agreement, we can give out 15% of our profit each year as profit share, and so that's the main way of rewarding, incentivizing our staff. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily won't change in the future. That's probably something for us to look at, but for the moment, we don't have anything separate.
And how about yourself? Sorry.
Yeah, I think that, again, this is a really interesting question, and we've taken the approach of separating out the trust and the employee owners. They're the shareholders, okay, and that is entirely separate to the operations of the business. So the operation of the business of Ing is run on the same principles it was before the shareholders changed. So when I owned the business, I paid people what I needed to incentivize them and, market rates. So that hasn't really changed. So just because our ownership structure has changed, if you know what I mean. So everyone who's eligible participates in the profit share, which, as Abby said, is really, really important. But that is a separate conversation to the individual conversations you have with people about their remuneration and their packages. So, you know, we're largely defined as well by what's happening out in the marketplace. So you can't let your ownership structure hamper the way you're operating as a successful business, if you know what I mean. So if someone is really, really important and really good and needs to be remunerated in a certain way, you know, don't let that stop you from doing that because you've got to think of everyone else further down the line. In the same way, I didn't do that for 25 years. So I hope that makes sense. Just one quick point though, and I just with Abby, one of the greatest things I think with an employee ownership is there's a period where I still have residuals to be paid out on the deal that was done. However, we have started paying our staff their bonuses as employee owners or shareholders, and that has been an amazing moment. You know, when people actually see, you know, that moment when money is coming to them because they're an employee owned, that is a real game changer, I think, because it was quite hard to get across how has the business changed for the individual in the business. Sorry, that was a very long answer. Sorry about that.
No, not at all. And I guess, again, a slight running theme through this approach is that, you know, think about the business. It's about what the business needs. The EOT is a fantastic platform and opportunity to reward a larger group of individuals. But if there is something your business needs from that senior group, well, actually, look at that from a business perspective, how you would run a business rather than, excuse me, from the kind of EO perspective. So there is one of the questions we've got here as well is around who produces a leadership succession plan. So Alex, I might come to you with this question. From a best practice approach, who's het for creating and planning leadership succession? Is it the founding owner? Is it individuals in the leadership team? Where does it sit?
From the research and from my experience, I wouldn't say there is a single best solution. Again, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it's what is right for the business. What struck me in Leanne's comments in her introduction it was a personal decision, and therefore she took it at a time and pace that felt right to her. If we look at when the succession plan goes wrong, that is when a founder feels that they are being pushed out prematurely, or they step away without ensuring that there is leadership in place. A team of individuals can define what is right for a single leader and address those challenges. As Abby said, the business had established a leadership team before there was a leader of that leadership team. And I think it is important that at the heart of this, there are very good, open, honest conversations taking place with and between the founder and the senior leader or senior leaders of the business about not only what type of leader is right for the business, but what succession process is appropriate for the business.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Abby, just staying on this question a little bit. I guess when the leadership team was first created, was that something that the kind of founding owners decided to put in place, or was that something that you felt, you know, as a leadership team, you felt was the right thing to have within the business?
Well, when we became employee owned and they sort of said that they would like to step away, it was obvious that we needed somebody to run the business, and it wasn't quite a case of sort of, you know, who's still standing at the front, but you know, it was obvious who were the senior members of the team who could form the leadership team, and we obviously had discussions about that and made sure that those people were comfortable now effectively, but running the business. So it was a little bit of both, actually. A little bit of the founders sort of saying, yes, I think these people would be good to form that leadership team, and those people sort of saying, yes, actually, I think that makes sense.
Okay, thanks, Abby. So I don't know why I muted myself there. I'm going to stick with you for just one other question, Abby, if you don't mind. Sure. We've got a question here about kind of thinking about the approach when selecting a successor, but I'm actually going to flip that around a little bit or change it, because you've done the succession in terms of the leadership team. You're in place as the MD now. Thinking about your future successor, have you got an approach that you would recommend when starting to select that next person? And will it be a person, or do you think you might do a team?
Yeah. So yeah. I think what's quite interesting is that my appointment has sort of has set the way for how NC Squared might work from a leadership perspective going forward, and I think it does make sense to have one person accountable at the top. So I would suspect that going forward we would look to replace my role, the MD role. And I think it's going to be on my to-do list to work out a process in order to do that. That's definitely something that I'm now aware of. It's one of those things where I haven't really wanted it to be the first thing I do, because I don't know if that might look a little bit weird that the first thing I'm doing is working out how to replace myself. But yes, that is, I see that as down to me to now start having some of the conversations about how succession might work for my role, and how are we going to get, to Leanne's point, some people on training in order to start preparing them for bringing through the ranks and up into the leadership team and then beyond.
Okay.
Yogi, can I add something to that? I think that one of the things that I've noticed from our first succession process is it's been entirely positive, in that I think it's given all the people within Ing the idea that they can think of succession for themselves. So when the founder leaves, suddenly the ceiling opens up, and perhaps where they thought in the past that they couldn't, that it was all controlled by the founder. I think now that we've got so many younger people who are really seeing that they've got a long-term career in Ing, and that there are opportunities. So whilst they're not jostling for the top position now, it's opened up the ability to talk about it. And I think that's really difficult when the founder is there, because nobody wants to, it's the elephant in the room, isn't it? No one is going to go up to the founder and say, by the way, when are you going? And how does your departure affect my life? Whereas now that we're talking about succession all the time, we've got people openly saying, yeah, I'd like a career path where I could get to your job. And I think that's entirely positive, because it takes a long time to get yourself into that position if you haven't considered yourself as a sort of managing director role.
Fantastic. Yeah, you're right. It does. It kind of, I guess what I'm hearing is it gives this opportunity to broaden and start developing individuals within the business, and it kind of gives people this line of sight in terms of where they could go. Okay, let's take a few more questions from the audience. So how many, actually, to both of you, Leanne and Abby, apologies if you've mentioned this before, how many employees have each of you got?
I've got 45, or Ing has 45. I don't have any anymore. But Ing has 45.
Okay, Abby?
We're at 20.
Okay. And I guess for both of you, is there a view to the growth, and is there kind of a plan for how the business might grow? Certainly, I guess for you, Leanne, it's now down to Damien, who's the successor. Is that right?
Yes, but there is. But again, I'm a trustee, and so Damien reports through to the trustee board, and I also act as his line manager. So we meet every month, and there is a very formal process for determining the future of the business. So I think that's going very well. I mean, as you say, none of these things are linear. You start out with your plan and your margins and growth, and then life happens. But I think all in all, it's going very well.
Fantastic. Abby?
So we've got plans for growth. Actually, from our perspective, not necessarily growth in people, as in the number of people working for NC Squared. We would like to try and keep that fairly flat, actually. But we do have plans in place for growth of licenses and growth of revenue to try and accelerate paying off the consideration, and then who knows after that. That's the next exciting step.
Fantastic. Right, so we've got a question here around the deferred consideration that you mentioned. So given the length of time it takes to make the final consideration payment, what types of incentives did either of you put in place to attract a new MD? I appreciate, Abby, that's probably a kind of a difficult question, but Leanne, I don't know if there's some insight there in terms of attracting Damien into the role, for example, when you knew that you still had the deferred consideration to pay?
Yeah, but again, I think we sort of separated that out in our minds. So the consideration was not really part of the discussions in terms of attracting him as an MD. That was very much based on what would an MD of an agency like this and this sort of turnover and the level of growth we were looking for be paid. So the consideration is basically a cost of just like any other sort of loan or sort of operational payment that needs to be sort of paid. So it was never really a big concern. I think also because the business is in good shape, that I felt that and I guess our consideration, the way we structured it, was that it was very conservative in terms of how much the business had to pay out to fulfill the final payments. And but what we did do is put in a clause that if the business had more profits each year, then the extra profits would be split. There's a formula developed that a certain amount would go to the sellers and a certain amount would go to the staff. So it was a win-win for everybody, and everybody is motivated to get the consideration paid off. Everyone in the management team are, because they know they're all aware now how much potentially they can all get from profits. So they want me out of the way as soon as possible, because then they can get their hands on more of the profit. I say that in jest. It sounds like they're scheming. They're not. It's a complete win for everybody to get the consideration paid off. You're on mute.
Sorry, it had to happen once, didn't
Sorry.
it? Thanks, Leanne. The question I was asking was around open book management, because Leanne, you mentioned that there is an awareness of the deferred consideration and the payment needed. Do you operate open book management? Abby, do you operate in that way?
Yes, we've been very open about our financials. We weren't closed before becoming employee owned, but it was almost just that we didn't feel that everybody needed to know. But since then, we go through our financials quite regularly. We know, everybody knows the formula, so we again have like Leanne, we have a formula. The profit each year gets split between deferred consideration, investment kept back in the business, and then some of it goes out to employee owners as profit share. So everybody knows that formula. We are now on the journey of starting to talk about what financial freedom might mean to us, and how that might work once we get to the point where potentially 100%. I mean, I know it isn't always going to be 100%, because the business needs money to be kept back, but once a larger percentage of the profit could go out to employee owners, what that might mean.
I think we're slightly different to that, and maybe it's a personal view. I mean, we've always been quite open. I don't know if we're completely open as an organisation. We run. We have always run in a way that everyone understands how the business is going, and we try to be as open as possible. But also, it's a commercial business, so you have to take judgments of what you share with people, in terms of sometimes there's sensitive information that is not to be shared. You've got to get to a certain level within the business to A, want to know about that, or B, have access to that information. And I think it's a really interesting point, because when I first started hearing about employee ownership, and I think perhaps in the architecture and sort of engineering sector, it's sold to people as everyone gets involved, right? You're now employee owned, so everyone gets to run the business. Okay. So we had already worked on a basis where everyone in the business gets involved in management of the business. So we have sort of sectors where you can be the most junior person or the most senior person, and you're working on that. So we've got a HR and wellbeing group, we've got a marketing group, we've got digital, all of these. So everyone has access to being involved in running of the business. However, it's not a commune. It's still a business that runs with a very clear hierarchy, almost with no difference to when it was owned by me to when it's employee ownership. So the employee ownership trust now owns the business, and but it doesn't run the business. And I think that's an important distinction. And I think that's why a lot of perhaps younger members of staff at different companies have been a bit disappointed in the outcomes of employee ownership, because it's kind of PR'd as this thing where everyone gets involved, and then they're a bit like, well, I'm not allowed to go and decide what his salary is or her salary is. That's not how it runs. So again, I hope that's a clear answer.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And it kind of it brings us back to it's what's good for the business. So I'm conscious of time. I could sit here and chat to you guys all day. But we're going to be moving into our networking area. So we have got lots of questions that are being asked. For those individuals, if your question hasn't been answered, please do go and join Leanne, Abby and Alex on the networking tables that we'll be moving into. But just to wrap off our conversation today, what I'd like to do is for each of you to maybe give me one tip or piece of advice. We heard from Alex in terms of what the report said, but Alex, again, I'd love to hear kind of any other tips that you've got around leadership succession. So Alex, are you okay if we start with you and then move to Leanne and then Abby?
Yeah. I will pull out some strands from the report, and I would say start early, think about what the business needs, and have great conversations.
Thank you, Alex.
I would say, like Alex, plan ahead. But as the founder, if you say you're going, go. Don't hang around and sort of tantalize people with the idea that you're leaving, and never walk out the door.
Fantastic. And Abby?
I think for us, the key tip, which it would have been good to have known at the start, was really being very honest about, with employee owners, about why succession is needed and why a leader is needed within your company, because I think that would have helped us a lot.
Fantastic. Some really, really great tips there. So just to round it off, start early, have great conversations. If you're saying you're going, go, and be honest with your employee owners around what a leader does and what the point of them is. So hopefully you guys have had a good opportunity to chat through your experiences today, and you'll get joined by lots of people during the networking as well. So we've got networking coming up. You'll be moved into the networking area, and then once that's finished, you'll be coming back, and I will round off today's session. Hello, welcome back everyone. I could see that the tables were all full and lots of conversations happening, so hope you got a lot of value from that session. So just wanted to wrap up by kind of just reminding you about the Leadership Succession Masterclass that I mentioned at the very beginning. So that's taking place 25th of April in London at Howden Group premises. We've also got our How to be an Effective Independent Trustee coming up in February, and our Empowering Leadership in an EO Business. All themes that hopefully you've seen that have been covered today in today's session, and how important they are in terms of that EO journey. And again, a reminder of the events that we've got coming up, with the How to Become Employee Owned webinar happening in just less than a month. If you have got anybody that you know, or someone's come to you and gone, oh, what's this employee ownership all about? Perfect opportunity for them to come and find out. And the Robert Oakeshott lecture, again, this is available to all of our members. So please do, if you've got the opportunity, come along. They're fantastic conversations, great opportunities to network, and just really interesting approaches and thinking points and talking points. Sponsored by Brabner's at Bayes Business School. And got a trustee dinner associated with that as well. We have got lots more events coming up and more in-person events this year, which is fantastic. And if you do want to, if you've got premises that you'd love to host an EOA network meeting, please do get in touch with us, whether with your membership executive or responding back to the emails that we send you. We have that opportunity. We love showcasing our employee-owned members. So please do get in touch if you've got premises. And that's it. So you will be getting an email at the end of this session, and it will go through things that we've discussed today, the report that I mentioned, booking links to the EO Learn that I spoke about as well, and a link to today's recording. So you can go back, pause, listen, make notes of all the things that you felt were important or were interesting to you. And just finally, before I let you guys go off and enjoy your lunch, just a quick, hopefully summary of what you can get from the EOA. We support our members to deliver good, and actually further than good, great employee ownership through our networking events like this, our training courses. We have the EO Hub. If you're not on the EO Hub, please do go and join. It's where you can discuss your questions with people. You can look at our resources and download them, and you can get a sense of all the different news from around the EO sector. So please do keep engaged with us. But I'll let you head off now. I'll say goodbye, and yeah, hopefully see you next time.